Hello everybody. In this video we're going to take a look at LODs, how we can create them and how we can set them up and use them in the Unity game engine. Now LODs refer to level of detail, and what we're really talking about here is that the distance that a mesh is from your camera in your game, for example, depending on that distance, you might not need to have all that fine detail on your mesh. That when you're very close to it, you need to have all that detail, but if the camera is much further back, that detail isn't going to read anyway. So in those cases, you can use a mesh, a model that is a lower polygon count, lower resolution mesh, or in this case, level of detail. So I have this mesh here that we're going to be using for this example. I am going to go to Display, Heads-Up Display, Poly Count, and what I'd like you to notice here is that this mesh has 4,032 faces. So relatively dense mesh. Let's see what we can do to bring down its poly count so that we can use this is a good example to demonstrate LODs. I think the first thing I'll do actually is rename this. I'm going to just rename it Teddy LOD 00. Okay, this will be our highest resolution mesh. Remember that it is 4,032 faces or polygons. I'm going to move it over here. We'll just duplicate it, and I'll put that duplicate back at the origin. It, because it's just a duplicate, is actually identical in polygon count. It is also 4,032 faces. But let's look at how we can lower that resolution. So one way that we can very quickly and easily lower the resolution would be to go to Mesh and Reduce right here. We'll go to Reduce. I'll open up its tool settings, and currently I have it set to a percentage of 50%, so it should bring down the polygon count by 50%. Remember that currently it's 4,032 faces. If I apply that, it is now 1,986 faces. Let's go ahead and duplicate that again, and we'll reduce it even further. This example here is 988 faces. We can continue seeing what we can get with this. Apply. And then this one is only 486 faces. Now, if we look at these from a distance, they all do look pretty good. They all do look pretty similar. This would function and could work as LODs. And you saw that there was a very quick and easy way to create them. In fact, because I renamed my mesh, we already have them named very nicely as LOD 00, 01, 02, and 03. So this will work, although if you look at the way that it's laid out, I personally find that doing it by hand, while it takes more effort, while it does take more time, I can in fact get better results. So as a quick solution, certainly one could go to Mesh and reduce their mesh using this tool. But what I'm going to do now is actually manually reduce the polygon count to create my LODs. And actually, before I do that, let's just take a look at this real quick. We'll take a look at my lowest resolution mesh here. And notice that when we applied that, when we went to Mesh Reduce, we do get this little pop-up here, and then we can in fact adjust this and try bringing the number even higher if we want to reduce it even further. You can see that you can go quite far with it. Even something like, at this resolution could possibly work for an LOD that is going to be very, very far from the camera. We can also adjust it, bring it back up higher. So this is a way that you could use that tool and further tweak it while still not having to put a big time investment into creating your LODs. Again, what I'm going to do is actually manually reduce the polygon count because I think I'll get some better results in creating my LODs. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those, and I'll just select my model again and duplicate it again and bring it back to 0, and I will start reducing the polygon count manually. Now I'll be speeding up the video at this point because it doesn't really make much sense for me to talk through the process step by step, but you'll still be able to see how more or less I accomplish reducing the polygon count on a mesh. Okay, so you can see that you saw a little bit of my process of actually manually going through my mesh and scrubbing it down or reducing the polygon count. We can compare it to the original. Let's take a look at how they look. You can see that we've been able to keep the form pretty well. If we compare the polygon count between the two, this one is 4,032 faces, and this one here is only 710 faces. So a pretty good reduction there in the polygon count. Again, if we compare this, let's say, to that more kind of that more automated way of doing it, simply by going to mesh and then reducing. You can see that, here, let's bring this down even further. We'll bring it down to a similar polygon count as the one that I manually did. So able to retain a little bit more of the form of it, a little bit better through actually just doing it manually myself. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. You might have been wondering about some of my process as I was working on it. Why did I open up my UV editor here? Well, the reason why is because if I do want to use textures, as much as possible, I'd like to retain that UV work that I've done so that whatever map I apply to this mesh can also apply to this mesh here as well. You may have also noticed that I was going to edit mesh and then delete edge vertex. Instead of just clicking on the delete button and deleting those edges as I selected them, I wanted to make sure that I was also deleting the vertices as well. So this tool ensures that. It makes sure that you're deleting not just the edges, but also their accompanying vertices that you don't need. So now that I have one of my new LOD levels here, my level of detail meshes here, I'm going to go ahead and perhaps move both of these off to the side. I'll duplicate this one, and I'll further reduce the polygon count to get a third LOD. Once again, I'm just going to speed through the process. Okay, so here's what I've got so far. We can go ahead and compare it with the other ones. So we've got our 3 levels of detail here. This one is 4,032 faces, this one is 710, and currently this one here is 302. I'm going to just come over here and soften those edges. That'll make it look a little nicer. It can get quite addictive when you're reducing the polygon count on a mesh because it really becomes an interesting and fun challenge. You can see that from a distance it really doesn't make too much of a difference which mesh we're looking at, but then when we get up closer there's a big difference, let's say, between this one and this one here. I could potentially try to reduce it even further, but I think that for the sake of this demo, this should actually work just fine. As I had mentioned before, I wanted to retain my UVs that I have here. In case I use a texture image for these, you can see that all 3 of these will still be able to use the same texture map, so that's a good thing. I'm going to go ahead and take all of these, bring them back to the origin here. I don't want to keep all of this history, all these operations that I've done, so I'm going to delete history by going to Edit, Delete by Type History. That'll get rid of any of that history that's on those objects there. We have our LOD 00, 01, and 02. I'm going to go ahead and put those into a group, which I will name Teddy LODs. And I think we're ready to go ahead and try this out, to bring it into Unity and see how it works. So I've got them in a group. I've got my 3 different resolutions in here. I'll go ahead and go to select my group so that I can go to File, Export Selection. I'm going to export it out as an FBX, and I just need to make sure that I know where I'm exporting it to. In this case, I think I have already a folder on my desktop where I can save this to, my LOD Examples, and I'll just call this Teddy LODs and export it out. Let's go ahead and go into Unity and test it out. So here we are in Unity. Let's go ahead and get that asset that I just exported out from Maya. I have it right here. I'm going to go ahead and drag it into my project. And now that we have it in the project, let's go ahead and put it into our scene here and check it out. Just rotate it, take a look at it. And what you'll notice is that because we set it up in Maya using a group and then placing those 3 objects into the group, that we have that Teddy LODs here. If I expand on that, you'll see that each of my meshes, the LOD 00, 01, and 02 are all in here. And in fact, when I select them, we can actually see the different meshes. You can see it's switching among those 3. If I select the main node there, what you'll notice here in the inspector is that we have this LOD group, and we have these distances set here where it uses LOD 0, 1, and 2, and then finally, if the camera is really, really far away, it just calls out the model altogether. In other words, it doesn't render it when you get to a certain distance here. Now, if we want to test that out, what we can do is go ahead and just move our camera. You'll notice that the camera here in the inspector is actually moving. And we're still looking at the same resolution right now, but if we get right to about this point, still using LOD 0, but once we go just a little bit further, it goes to LOD 1, and in fact that's looking pretty good. I'm really not seeing much of a pop there, so that's nice. We'll go ahead and go even a little further. We're still using LOD 1 now, but if we just go a little bit further, we just popped to LOD 2, which is actually our third LOD. And again, I'm not really seeing much of a pop there, so I think that these LODs are working quite successfully, so that's good. Another way we can look at this is just grabbing this camera icon here and scrubbing to the right. It's using LOD 1, and then once we get to this point here, it switches over to the next level, and finally our third level. And if we go all the way over this far away, where we can't really see it anyway, it will cull it all together. In other words, it won't render it at all. So that we can maybe better see this, let's go ahead and try creating 3 different materials for this, and we'll apply the different materials to each one of the LODs. So I'm going to call this one red matte. We'll create 2 more. We'll call this one green matte. And a third one, which we'll call blue matte. Okay, and then we'll just change those to their respective colors. One of them will be blue. The other will be green, and this one will be red. And we'll apply them to the different levels. So we'll make level the LOD 00 red. We'll make LOD 01 green, and LOD 02 blue. And let's test it out and see. This will allow us to more easily see where it switches from one camera to another. So we'll go ahead and zoom out. You can see it's still red. And then once we get to LOD, once we get to this distance here, we just go a little further. Sure enough, that's right where it's changing from the one LOD to the other LOD. Go a little further, and there you can see it's switching from the green to the blue now. I'm going to go ahead and just apply the red to all 3 of them. And in fact, we'll do a couple more things to this before we wrap up this video. I'm going to select my LOD group, and I'm going to apply a rigid body to it, or actually collision. I'm going to apply collision to it. So I'm going to go to Add Component, Physics, and we'll just give it a, we could give it a capsule collider, or we can use a mesh collider. We could even use our low polygon mesh as the collider. Let's go ahead and just use a capsule collider though. We'll just try that. See if that gives us a good enough result here. Just the position of it, the height. That should work. And we'll go ahead and test this out by actually playing the level. Here's our character, or we got our character here, we got our teddy bear there. If we run away from it, it's going to switch. And I just barely saw it switch, so I think that's working quite effectively. If you really look at it carefully, you can see it pop from one state to the other. And because we've added collision to it, now we can't run through it. We can do something more with this though. Besides our capsule collider, let's try adding a rigid body to it. So I'm going to go to Physics, Rigid Body. Go ahead and play this again. And now we'll run into it, and we can knock it over. Now remember, it's using the capsule collider, so actually we can roll it down the street like that. The house obviously doesn't have collision on it. And maybe we can get it to roll far enough away that it actually changes its LOD. I think we've done a pretty good job here because I'm actually not seeing it pop. So in fact, if we wanted to see it pop, we could go ahead and select and change that material on it again. Play this again. Come over here and knock over this poor teddy bear. And we'll try pushing it off into the distance. And watch it go. And you can see it's actually popped over to its other, and there it goes to the third LOD. So we can see that it is effectively using its 3 different states. If we run over towards it, run a little faster, you'll see it pops back to those different states. I'm going to go ahead and switch that back so that they're all red. So we've looked at this teddy bear mesh. We made some different LODs for it. We've implemented it here in Unity. We even applied a capsule collider to the teddy bear mesh here, along with a rigid body, so that we could actually interact with this object, knock it over, have it roll. The reason why it rolls, and not very realistically, is because it's actually using this capsule collider. Let's take a look at something related to all this where we could actually use a mesh as a collider rather than the capsule collider. And to do that, I'm actually going to switch back over to Maya. And what I want you to see here is that these are my 3 LODs that we created earlier. 1, 2, and 3, or 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, and 0, 2. I created a 4th one here. However, I'm not going to actually set this up as an LOD, although you can see it's considerably simpler geometry, and it could work very well as yet another LOD, because when we're really, really far away, you can see that it actually could do a pretty good job functioning as an LOD. And in fact, this one is only 56 faces. So it actually might be worthwhile to go ahead and set that up as an LOD as well. But that's not what we're going to do for this example. What I would like to do is, I'm just going to hide these. Let me just hide those. Okay, there we go. We're going to export this out and use it as a collision object instead of using that capsule collider. Now, it looks like I still have this history here from when I scrubbed this model down, when I reduced its polygon count. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Edit, Delete by Type History. Get rid of that history. Make sure I don't have any transform data on here. I got the name Teddy_collision on there, so that's good. I'll go ahead and go to File, Export Selection, and export it out. Give it a name, and we'll go back over to Unity. Now that we're back in here, let's go ahead and bring that mesh into our scene here. Okay, so here it is, Teddy Collision, what I just exported out. I'm going to go ahead and drag that into my project here. And what we'll do is we'll set this mesh up as this teddy bear's collision. And then instead of running into it, knocking it over, and then having it roll in this not very realistic way, we can have it behave a little bit more realistically. So I'm going to get rid of this capsule collider that's on this right now. So to get rid of it, I'm going to just click on these three little dots here, remove component. We'll go ahead and go back to add component. Once again, go to physics. This time, instead of applying a capsule collider or any of these other colliders, such as the box collider, what we will do is apply a mesh collider to it. Now, currently, it's going to be using itself, more or less, but what we can do is tell it what mesh to use. Actually, I'm wrong. Right now it's saying that it's not using any mesh. Okay, so we actually do need to assign the mesh to it. So I'll go ahead and click on this. We'll find it among all our meshes here, and here it is. Go ahead and apply it. And now it should use this mesh as its collision. So let's test it out and see how it behaves when we run into it now. Oops, it actually fell through the surface. There's a little something that we need to do to this. What I'm going to do is actually check this convex box here. Okay, that will change the collision so that it's still more or less conforming with this mesh, but it'll behave in a way that's going to keep it from going through the ground plane there. Okay, so let's go ahead and play this again, try it out. Okay, now it's not falling through the world. We'll go ahead and run into it, and you can see that that's a little bit more believable. It's not just rolling all over the place anymore. So there you go. There's a little bit about LODs and collision. I hope that you get something out of this video. Hopefully it was useful for you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.